Today's guest is none other than Brad Stine. Brad, if you're not familiar with his work, is a stand-up comedian. He'll tell his story during our conversation, how he got into stand-up comedy, but he has performed in just about every possible venue across the country, now performing primarily in Christian venues, whether it's churches or conferences, those kind of things. Has a podcast, just an absolutely incredible talent. Very funny, but very passionate. And you're going to hear this in the interview. Very passionate about using his talents and his abilities to glorify God, to point others to God, and really to be a voice that calls American Christians to discipleship. And man, what a fantastic conversation. Very helpful. I've followed Brad just as from the outside, his entertainment, I guess, for many, many years, and always enjoyed him. He's been an actor. He started as a magician, which he talks about in the interview. A lot of stand-up comedy. He's been just about everywhere. So I've seen him over the years and really enjoyed him and kind of his style and his brand of comedy. Super fast, super aggressive, just a lot of fun. But getting to hear his story and really what he's passionate about today was very, very helpful. And I know will be helpful to you. This is an interesting conversation, but it's a helpful conversation, and I know it will be a blessing. So again, without further ado, today's guest, Brad Stine. Brad Stine, thank you for joining me today, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm on a work release program, and so I still have 3 more charities I have to give to. So you were first in line, so be grateful that you're on the list for all felony assaults. You're on the list, so I'd say use it while the getting's good, because there's probably
I'm rarely first in line, so just to hear that I'm first in line for something makes me happy.
Well, there you have it. All right, so God is obviously showing favor for you in 2025.
I think this conversation also indicates that we both have questionable friends. We were connected by Joel, who, I don't know. Not everyone has a Joel in their life, so questionable. At least that's what you said to me. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
No, I need a Joel to keep me balanced, because I figure when things are getting really bad and I feel like I'm really missing it, I go, but there's Joel, so I got to be better than that.
You got
I always have that as the standard for when I feel like I'm losing it. There's even a bigger wretch than me. So,
oh man, well, Joel's been a good friend of mine and for a while now, and he said, "Hey, what would you think about having Brad on?" I didn't even know, and I should have known this, but I didn't even know that you guys had a relationship and that you were friends. And I've been following you for years, so I was super stoked to hear that it was even a possibility and put it together. So. Man,
not me.
Awesome.
I didn't want to do it. I got to be honest. It was not something I wanted to do. But again, you suck it up. You give away to a couple charities a year just to give the sense that you're altruistic. But
right.
So I'm trying to be honest. But no, listen, listen, Joel's a great guy. Joel, not that your listeners, maybe they know him, I don't know, but through something you've done. But I want to say this, it's a perfect chance to say, how much I appreciate his heart. He was instrumental in getting my podcast off the ground, because we tried to do something together through his studio in California. And we did it through rants and things that I had written. So they were very well produced. He's got a great studio. Anybody in that area should use him if they're trying to do a wonderful production. And it just kind of didn't pan out. It didn't make money enough to make it worth the effort. But we tried. All you can do is roll the dice.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to kind of get a feel for what this can look like and what it might be. And I just kind of took it to my house and said, "Hey, Joel, I'm going to, I guess, try over here, and I appreciate all the effort you gave me and whatever." And he was so just kind about, "Hey, I wish you great. I hope it works and whatever." And so I'm still building my podcast as well. But I don't think I would have even started it had he not kind of believed in what I was about and what I stood for, and thought maybe it was worth a platform. So, I'm just giving him shout outs that I appreciate what he's done, and hopefully he'll get a prophet's reward somewhere down the road.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's definitely kind of the quintessential giver. He's a connector. He's a giver. He just wants God's work to go forward, and is happy and content to not get the credit for it. He's been a great blessing in my life, and and connections like this are helpful too. So
Yeah.
um, let's let's start with your comedy career. You have a really interesting kind of entertainment career, comedy career. Love to hear how you got into that, and the trajectory that you've been on. It's been interesting over the years. I've watched you for years, and you have been an actor, entertainer, I guess, because it's more than just stand-up comedy, right? You are an entertainer, not just a stand-up comedian. But can you talk about your career a little bit, how you got into that, and kind of what launched that for you?
Well, I started out as a magician. I was a close-up magician in Southern California
Yeah,
in the 80s. So that's kind of started my life in the entertainment business. And I just love that kind of world of sleight of hand and sideshows and just that kind of silly,
yeah,
crazy stuff.
yeah.
But what happened was, it was very pragmatic. Uh, there wasn't a lot of money to be made in close-up magic. I was working
Right.
in restaurants and they don't pay a lot. But, I was a young kid trying to figure it out. And I thought, but I always did it funny. Yeah, my natural delivery was just funny. I was just, inherently humorous. So it was just very natural for me to do it in a funny way. And I thought, well, what if I was to create a comedy magic type show that I
Yeah.
could do in comedy clubs? Because I was just looking for money. It was just purely
Needed a
pragmatic.
job.
Yeah, it's just where else could I go find some income
Yeah.
other than this close up magic thing? So I need a bigger show that I can do on a stage because there's more money there. And it was all about just that. And so I started, it's a long, difficult road to get into clubs and get booked, but through all the channels that you do and the open mic nights and experimenting and trying this and trying that, I started getting into the clubs. And I just found myself intrigued by stand up comedy because it's so much more difficult than
Sure.
virtually any performance art. It really is. I mean, doing sleight of hand well is hard. I mean, it's a technique you have to learn, like juggling or piano or anything is hard. But you can kind of teach anybody mechanical abilities. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, not they're not all going to be magnificent, but you can teach somebody how to kind of do a trick here, a trick there, a sleight of
Right.
hand here and there.
Right.
You can't really teach somebody to be a comedian. You either can do it or you can't. And the biggest, probably the biggest challenge for a stand-up comedy, other than having to be funny, is are you willing to endure the hatred and the vitriol and the absolute um, uh, attack that you're going to get on stage as the audience despises you while you're trying to figure this crazy thing out because it's so hard.
Yeah.
And as I've always said, it's the only art form I know of that you have to rehearse in front of the audience because comedy only works if people respond. I can
Yeah.
start a
Right. Right.
band in my garage and record it and listen back and hear music and think that's pretty good. Whether anybody ever likes it or not is irrelevant. It worked. But comedy ain't like that. You
Yeah.
have to have the audience hear it and laugh or not. And so that's a challenge. And I just felt like I wanted to take up that challenge. Can I get rid of these tricks, these magic tricks, which are basically props that are cheating, and just be a stand-up comic? Can I do that? So it was kind of a challenge I gave myself, and sure enough, over time, I was able to find material that worked enough that they thought I was funny enough that they'd hire me and bring me back, and got rid of the eventually got rid of the magic tricks and was just a stand-up. And then over time, I found myself in churches. We're performing in churches because I worked with a company that was called Clean Comedians, and they only booked clean comedy. And so I thought, oh, here's another
Yeah.
revenue stream. It was
Yeah.
strictly
Yeah.
about making more money because I was already clean. I was a Christian in clubs. And suddenly they were booking me in churches. And I grew up in the church. I'd never seen a comic in a church in my life.
Right.
I didn't know what
Right.
happened. This is
Right.
back in the 90s. And so I started working in churches, and suddenly I started saying things from the stage as a comic about my faith and things because I was in front of my people and it just
Mm-hmm.
made sense. And they would be not laughing, but in fact would be kind of in a contemplative silence, and I realized, wow, there's something bigger and deeper and richer here
Yeah.
than I had ever anticipated. And it feels like it's where I belong. And I didn't understand what that meant. And without going through the long story, unless we end up going that direction, I realized I was called to ministry and that I was
Yeah.
supposed to be telling God's story through the gifts he had given me. And so here I find myself these many years later,
Yeah.
basically doing for Christian audiences and churches and so forth along that line, and lifting up God through an unorthodox means of communication, which is stand-up comedy, and trying to inspire people to discipleship,
Yeah.
which is a much more difficult road than just becoming a Christian. That's easy. Becoming a Christian is easy because Jesus did all the work. Being a disciple is hard because I have to
Right.
do the work. And so, work it out with fear and trembling as God helps. So, that's kind of a short version of a long life
Yeah.
story that, I don't know how much time I have left, but hopefully
Yeah.
whatever that is, it does it leaves some value for somebody somewhere.
Do you think, I guess I have two questions. One real quick question, just because I'm curious. Do you
Well,
think,
if you're going to do two questions, always please ask me the second question
I'm
first.
asking you the second question first, it's
Yeah.
the easy one.
Okay.
Has comedy, stand up comedy, you talked about dealing with the crowds and all that. It's such a crazy world to watch that, right? Just from afar. I've never done it, but just to watch it from afar, watch clips on social media. Do you think that has gotten harder with things like social media and people's access to stand up comics, which, I remember when my dad loved stand up comedy, and the only access we had to it when I was younger was we could find like an evening at the Improv on Saturday nights, right, on cable television or
I
something
was
like
on
that.
that.
And that was the only access we had. Well, now it seems like everybody feels like they are a stand up comic or they have something to say. Do you think it's become more difficult to do the club scene in that route now than it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago?
Well, there's a lot of layers to that question. By the way, I was on Evening at the Improv.
Oh yeah.
So who knows? You might have seen me,
Yeah,
but
maybe.
I was on that show back in the '90s. So it's a long question. No, it's a long answer, or at least, like I said, a layered answer. Because I'm not sure what you mean by is it harder uh, than it? Because on one hand, it's easier by far to be seen because of
Right.
social media.
Sure,
That
sure.
never existed before. Are you
Sure.
kidding me? If you got on Evening at the Improv, like we just mentioned, somebody had to book you. They had to like you. They had to put
Yeah,
you
yeah,
on.
yeah.
They had to choose to let you perform and be on basically network television or
Yep.
cable television, whatever it was at the time. Evening at the Improv was on A&E. So it was harder to get on TV then. You had to get booked, and nowadays, heck, anybody can get on
Yeah.
social media because all you need is a cell phone and
Right.
take a picture and put it on there. And to be perfectly honest, I feel like comedy has become very much degraded and
Yep.
watered down. The depth and the quality, because if you are a young kid that knows how to work the internet and knows how to get likes and views and follows, and you become a influencer, and you got 200,000 or 1 million followers, and you joke around on your little thing, but
Yeah,
everybody
right.
follows
Right.
you, and then somebody books you in a club, and people will sell out. You will book tickets and
Mm.
sell out, and you suck.
Right.
You're not a
Right.
comic. You don't know how to do
Right.
an hour's worth of stand-up comedy, but you have created this environment that people have become a fan of your silliness or whatever the heck you're doing that
Yeah.
caused
Yeah.
1 million people to want to follow you. So it's a little deceptive because people have it's kind of like the morning show on radio. If you ever had a morning show
Yeah.
following that you used to listen to, and they would get on, they would joke around. They'd always have one guy that laughed at everything. And you're off to work in the morning. You don't feel like going to work. So you're having a laugh in the morning. Yeah, these guys are great. I love these guys. And they show up at a comedy club to MC it. And they're like, oh, he's not really that funny because you
Right.
were just listening to him on radio as
Right.
something to
Right.
pass the time, and everybody was doing the laugh for you, and everybody had just created this sort of fake
Yeah.
system of
Yeah.
interplay that you're listening in. And so, and I'm not saying that some of these guys aren't talented or whatever, but my point is it's a contrived environment of
Right.
humor. But to be able then for those guys to turn that into an hour's worth of stand-up comedy, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So it's easier to be seen by people because of the internet. But I think it definitely causes you to not have to do the hard work, which is what you used to have to do in comedy of grinding it out, doing these one
Right.
nighters
Right.
in some bar in Louisiana on a Tuesday night that shut down the pool table for the seven guys to watch this show with this Kmart microphone. And you had to
Right.
figure out how to do this show for these guys who weren't
Yeah.
really interested in the first place with the TV on over there. I mean, it was boot camp, baby. If you figure out how to make people laugh here, you're learning how to be a comic.
Yeah.
And those days kind of got lost. But on the other hand, to try to get into a legitimate nightclub and to do open mics, that's much more difficult now. You got to sign up and wait in line and hope they give you 2 minutes. So those guys have a lot of work to do, but they're trying to get on a club stage, which is what you have to earn. So
Yeah.
in that regard, I think it's maybe even more difficult. More people
Yeah.
want to do it, so they're taking up more spaces. So, I got in the 80s, which was at kind of the mid boom of comedy, maybe towards the beginning of the tailing end of the huge boom, which was late 70s, 80s, where any pizza parlor could put up a comedy night on Tuesday and sell out. It was
Okay.
like this stand-up comedy thing is,
Yep.
oh my God,
Yep.
you got to come see this. And then it just everybody did it and it got old and so forth. And a lot of clubs went under over the years. And so I guess again, that's a
Yeah.
long muddy trip through my perspective of it, and I hope it answered your question, and
Yeah.
if it doesn't, I'm not getting paid, so who cares?
No, it does. And I just think it's fascinating to even think about, I'm a fan of stand-up comedy. So looking back, even in the late 60s through the 70s, for sure, the big names that we all follow. My daughter and I just went and watched a Jerry Seinfeld in person. We were like in row like 400 or something, right? And you could see him only because he was on the screen. But I told her, he's like one of the last of the old original stand-up comics that's still performing. So I'm a fan of that. But then to watch the trajectory is just, it's so fascinating. One of the things that is interesting to me about people like you is that you did that, right? The grind, the bars, the four guys that didn't care that you were there, that kind of stuff as a Christian. And I think this speaks to anyone who's listening. uh, how do you maintain your faith? How do you continue to pursue God and hear from God and learn from God when you're putting yourself arguably in an environment that doesn't promote that?
Well, honestly, I mean, it's kind of the same as anybody's life on the day to day, is
Right.
that you're always going to be amongst people who disagree or don't conform to your perspective. Now, that's not to say that maybe you're not in a little bit more challenging environment. I mean, a bar, right, is drunk people and, maybe people who are partying type folks who are not necessarily of the moral persuasion, perhaps,
Sure.
that you are used to on a Sunday.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there was that challenge, especially as a married man. I wasn't always married when I was doing that world, but as a married guy, you know, it is a little bit of an odd environment because it is looser in the morality element of
Right.
the type
Right.
of people there, and you're going to get opportunities for um, women to hit on you or whatever because you're in a bar and you're a
Sure.
comic and
Yeah.
you're funny and they think you're interesting and whatever. But I guess it's kind of like you are who you are, and if you kind of know why you're there and what you're trying to accomplish, then you just have to either live by your integrity or
Right.
not. I wish I could just give you this perfect, if you just read this one verse,
Sure.
everything gets better. Or, all you have to do is little,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
this little ritual, and suddenly there's no. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think men that are like going into the day to day, the mechanic or the guy in an office, whatever, probably has more opportunity to fall than somebody who's in an environment where it's happening a lot because you get used to how to defend this
Mm.
situation, whereas guys that aren't used to that and
Sure.
suddenly they're being tempted by something they're not expecting, they might kind of get caught from out of left field,
Yeah.
but if that's all you see all the time, it's like you kind of know
Yeah.
what's
Right.
going on.
Right.
So you try to get yourself out of that situation. Like a Joseph, if you don't want to put yourself in a position where
Yeah.
perhaps that kind of situation could take place. And by the way, my life as a Christian, I got saved at 9. So I have found in my life, it's not, I'm not saying this is exactly true because it's not, but for the most part, the man or woman that gets saved later in life, who's lived a secular life for the most of it and become saved, they're very much balanced because I know what the other side was and I did it a
Mm.
long time, and now that I'm a believer, um, this is better. I've
Yep.
tasted the other side and this is better. But those of us who started out in the church, we often have a prodigal journey. We end up living it, and suddenly there's this window where we say, I don't know, what's out there, man. I mean, it's literally what the prodigal story
Yep.
is.
Yep.
You're born in a rich family. You don't know how to appreciate it. You don't know how to be grateful for it. It's all you know. And you walk away and you pay the price of sowing wild oats, and you come home. So that's another story too, right? That oftentimes people
Yeah.
have to endure. And God is merciful and gracious, and long suffering. The beautiful thing about the prodigal story was the dad was kind of waiting there at the end. He saw him coming from afar, and you almost wonder, was he out there every night
Mm.
wondering, is he coming home tonight?
Yep.
Is he coming home tonight? And everybody listening to this probably has a child or someone who's had a prodigal journey or is walking away from God. And it's heartbreaking because you want them to be safe and you want them to be secure in their faith. And oftentimes, the crucible of walking away is what was necessary to
Mm.
bring them home.
Yeah.
And this time, I know why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because it was a tradition that I grew up with or
Right.
that you taught
Right.
me or you
Right.
kind of made us do. I'm here now because I want to be here, because I was redeemed, because I chose. They have this, I think it's called Rom Springen. The Amish do this. They grew up in this Amish environment, and there's this thing, I think I might be mispronouncing it, Rom Springen, where they kind of let their kids, teenage kids, 16, 17, whatever age, kind of go off and see what the world's like out there
Mm.
amongst the English, they call them. And they're doing some, sexual things, or
Sure.
maybe they're drinking or whatever. And they're basically saying, you're going to have to decide if you want to be part of our community. And many, if not most of them, come back. No, we're Amish. I'm going to be
Yeah.
here. But they kind of have this odd, I'm not saying it's biblical. I'm just saying it's what they do. It's kind
Yeah.
of like set them forth and let them decide, what does this mean to you, of anything? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying that's the best thing or that there's not some danger in that. There is. But I guess what I'm really saying is, God understands the human condition.
Mm.
He understands the difficulties, the temptations, because he was tempted like all men. He understands the challenges because he was a human. He loves you. He died for you so that you could be covered and protected even when you were, what makes grace amazing isn't that he saved you from what you've done. That's great. What makes it amazing is he saves you from what you haven't done yet.
Sure. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's like your wife saying, "I'm going to go cheat on you in a couple weeks, but you're going to forgive me, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure. It's like, wait, in a couple weeks? What are you talking about? No,
Yeah.
you don't get to go do that. No, I'll forgive you from this thing you did here, or I'll forgive you from this thing this argument we got into today. I'll get that. But you don't get to say you're going to do it in a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what God forgave us from. His salvation is about the totality of your life, because he sees the whole thing. I already know how this plays out, and I've forgiven you from those things too. That is really hard to understand about God,
Yep.
that he gives us that much grace. That's the power of the blood of Christ,
Yeah.
that he sees you through that prism. And that's what should cause you then, as the Bible talks about, should we sin then that grace may abound? No, that kind of grace, knowing you have that get out of jail free card, should cause you to be even more sanctified and to be even more grateful. I know I'm going to screw up down the road. I can't stop that. So getting there, I'm going to be even more grateful for God and try to pray and believe that he would help me be as righteous as I can, because I know that when I fail, and I will, he will forgive me. So I think there is something even more sacred and beautiful about that than thinking that we always nail it, because we don't.
That's right. No, that's right. I have this conversation with people often. They'll say, you either have to work to have a relationship with God, right? You need to do good works so that God will love you. Or as a Christian, you say we should do good works. And the difference is, I think for someone who understands scripture, it's not good works unto salvation. It's good works because of salvation. And it's exactly what you just said. It's Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10, which we often forget verse 10, right? For by grace are you saved through faith, that not of yourselves is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. We love those verses 8 and 9. But then 10 says that we're saved unto what? Love and good works. So the result or the consequence of understanding grace is, man, that grace is so overwhelming. Why would I want to run away from God?
Yeah.
And so it's a sad misunderstanding when people think I have to do stuff for God to accept me. No, he accepts you. He loves you. He paid the price on the cross for you. But the consequence or the result of that for someone who really gets it is I would never want to do anything to hurt God.
Well, it's gratefulness. And,
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's kind of like, I've said this for many years. I said, the fact that you live in a country that gives you the right to burn your flag is the reason why you shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the idea of, if you have that kind of freedom, then you should be honorable enough to not abuse it and not take it for granted. And so that, of course, is more of a socio-political framework. But if you put it into the process of a religious or philosophical framework, it's like, if you're going to grant me a pass when I fail, I'm going to do my best to honor that by trying not to fail along the way. I want to give you my heart and my spirit. Now, he still has to help you do the work, obviously, because, it's interesting. God says, I want you to behave in a certain holy way, but I know you can't, so I'm going to try to help you anyway. He makes the demands, but he also kind of assists you along the way. So, it is a shared responsibility of working it out with fear and trembling. But, I guess what I was trying to get at, we got a little bit out of in the weeds here, or maybe not. Maybe this was God ordained way to help somebody out there. But, you'd ask me about how did I do this when I was out in the clubs. And I guess I just wanted to be honest enough to say, look, there was times when I was very young that I wasn't always doing exactly what God would have wanted me to do. And he still saw me through it. And then got to a place where, yeah, it was exactly what you said, where I had, I was serving God, I was married, I was this and that, and then the same issues could come up, and it's like, you know what, I know what I committed to, I know what I believe, and
That's
I'm
good.
trying to be a man of honor, and that's
Yeah.
just the way it works. So, I guess I just want people to understand it's hard, and
Yeah.
if you failed, that's what God's grace and the cross
That's
was
good.
for. Was not when you do it right, it's when you
Yeah.
do it wrong.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted people to have hope, and or not see me as some perfect model of it, though, for the past, I've been married 32 years and I've never cheated on my wife. So,
Yeah.
I've got a good run,
Right.
but I'm not
Yeah.
perfect.
I think so I'm very grateful for children who accept Christ. They're raised in a Christian home. They accept Christ as a young person. You said you were 9. I think I was 5 when I put my faith in Christ, and
Wow.
I was raised in a Christian home, and an amazing home. Um, but for anyone who is going to live for God into adulthood, and particularly in the culture we live in, at the time we live in, there has to be a moment where there is salvation, right? You put your faith in Christ. I know I'm on my way to heaven. I've had my sins forgiven because of what Jesus Christ did for me on the cross. That's the confidence I have. But there needs to be a point in your life where you really do come to that, I'm going to pursue God because I've chosen to. This is about my relationship with God, not what I was taught as a child, not what my parents even modeled for me. Again, you want your kids to become Christians early and hopefully save them some heartache down the road and all of that. But I know for me as a 25-year-old guy, that was really the time. I had a wife, I had 2 little kids. That was the time where I really settled my pursuit of God through Jesus Christ. Not perfection, not any of those things, but I'm committed to God and his way and his path for my life. Was there a moment like that in your life where, maybe it wasn't a moment, but a time in your life where you really made that your own?
I think so. I was in a ministry, that was called Operation Restored Warrior. It was created for guys with PTSD, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they also would bring in non military,
Yep.
and so. But it was really a sort of this beautiful sort of weekend getaway, men only, where they were trying to bring some healing to deeper hurts in your life and whatever. And but it I had been serving God the best I could for up to that point. I had been a Promise Keepers comic for many years, so I was in front of
Mm.
thousands of men, and
Yep.
of course they saw me as a man of God or whatever, because they see you on stage, they give you all this credit, and they don't know the life struggles you have. And but they gave me this ring when I finished it, and it has a cross on it. It's actually this one right here, and um, but they put it on you as like you got through it, and they have the cross facing you, and they say one day when you're ready, take it off and turn it around. It's going to be facing out, and what that means is I'm giving my life to God. This is how I'm going to finish, and it's just a symbolic
Yeah.
thing to do, like um, baptize.
Yeah.
It's symbolism.
Yeah.
And so I just realized that as much as I had been a Christian, I was living in a country that I saw my First Amendment rights being stripped away. I saw people hating my faith in the West, which was created by Christianity. And
Mm.
I realized that, all the stuff we've watched in the last number of years, the lawfare and the abuse of freedom and going after citizens with who were Christians or conservative, and that this is happening by my government. This is what
Yeah.
totalitarianism and fascism actually is control, complete control over the system of the government and the dissemination of information and so forth. And I realized, wow, there's something at stake here, man. My country, there's no guarantee this nation is going to remain free or that Christianity is going to be sacrosanct. And I just said, do you believe this or not? Are you going to use these words as actual ways you're going to live your life, that you're willing to die or not? Because it may be coming. So you might as well decide if you're in
Mm.
or not. And I did. I brought my family, said, look, I'm going to do something and I want y'all to watch. And I think I had my daughter remove the ring, and I had my
Mm.
wife maybe turn it around, or my son, and have him put it back. I said, I want you to see what your dad's doing. I'm saying from this day forward that I'm a Christ follower, and I
Yeah.
always have been, but I'm going to say it more vigorously and more unapologetically and more substantially. And if this costs me my life by standing up for these principles, I just want you to know your dad died trying to do something he thought was
Mm,
true. And maybe it will influence you one way or another. That'll be up to you when your moment comes. But I want you guys to see what I'm doing. And so, I mean, as much as who knows, I probably did increments of that throughout my life
sure.
because that's
Yeah.
how Christianity works. That was one time when I really made a display of, all
Yeah.
right, I'm all in. Here we go. And, haven't looked back.
Yeah. It's awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about coming to that place of understanding where you could use your comedy, your gifts in ministry? I think this is a fascinating conversation because, I was kind of raised with this understanding. I'm not saying anyone said this to me, but just my observation as a young person, a teenager, and into young adulthood, that in order to go into ministry, we talk about ministry, you kind of go through this process of growing up and you go to all the youth camps and then you go to a Christian college and you get a Bible degree and then you go work at a church. And then, like, that's the path, right? When we talk about working in ministry, that's the path. And I've come to understand, at this stage of my life, that God gifts all of us differently, that ministry is not only church ministry, although that is ministry, but it's so much bigger than that. But we really need to figure out, how do we use what God has uniquely gifted us to do to accomplish his purpose? And I fear that a lot of people disqualify themselves because they think, I don't have the speaking gift or the service gift or whatever. I could never be in ministry like that. So I'll just kind of do my thing over here and go to church. Can you talk more about that? Because, again, fascinating to hear you say, God brought me to a point where I realized I can use these gifts and even experiences and all those things for ministry. And that's what I'm doing now. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think that what really happened was I had no choice. If you're a Christ follower, you will be called to ministry. What if we're going to just use terms?
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, life isn't complicated. Probably the oldest question on earth is, what's the meaning of life? Why am I here? Right, from the beginning of human history, there we're just trying to figure this out. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
What does this all mean? And it seems like to be this impenetrable question that no one has really found the answer to. And it's like, no, that's not true. The question is quite profound, but the answer is quite simple. My purpose here is to know God and to tell him to others. The end.
Mm.
Now you know why you exist.
Mm.
Now, how you do that is your skill sets, your work, your leisure, your interpersonal relationships, your marriage, your children or lack thereof, your where you are and your sphere of influence. You're
Yeah.
responsible just for that, your sphere of influence, which is your neighbors or wherever you are. So I think what I was doing was I was doing this comedy thing, and I told you when I ended up in churches, I would do, excuse me, I would do some biblically themed jokes in clubs, and it would get a laugh because it was more generic, like, Adam and Eve, blah, blah, blah. Or,
Yeah. Right.
God said, because just like somebody, well, I'm a Catholic, so, well, I'm Jewish, so it's almost like you're not really going deep. You're just kind of
Right.
giving it
Yeah.
as a
Sure.
general overview without really sort of saying, and by the way, I'm a believer in Jesus. But, in the church scenario, obviously, where people are there who are believers, it made more sense for me to go a little bit more detailed. But like I said, when I saw the fruit of that, I'm going, this is who I am. I'm supposed to do this. And so I think that when you see fruit, when you see that I'm compelled to say something, that's really what it was. I would have been a lot more famous and rich if I just tried to be funny and that was enough. Just be funny. That's a comic. And that's it. Don't be political. Don't have a religious bent. Just be funny for everybody, and you'll make more money, and you'll get a lot further. Don't make any waves. Don't
Yep.
try to stand for anything. But I'm like, no, I saw the entire art community, leaning left, like only the left can be artists. And it's like, look, I grew up in the church. I'm a Christian. I'm conservative. My grandparents were farmers. I was born in the Midwest. I'm not like these other people. And yet I'm as funny as them. I'm as
Mhm.
talented as them, but I don't see the world like they do.
Yeah.
And I'm
Right.
not ashamed of what I believe. And I'm tired of someone caricaturing me. And so when I started working in churches, people were like, oh, he's a Christian comedian. And I hated that
Mm.
term. It's like, no, I'm a comedian that happens to be a Christian.
Yep.
What do you mean? Are you a Christian mechanic? Are you a Christian shoe salesman?
Right. Right.
What
Right.
does that even mean? If
Right.
you're a Christian, good for you. But what is that? Well, how's that the predicate for, your skill set or whatever?
Yeah.
Let your skill be the witness. Let them see it and go, this guy's great. Yeah, I'm a Christian. Oh, okay, that's how Christians do stuff.
Mhm.
Wonderful. But I realized they were going to call me what they wanted, and even maybe it was a way to pigeonhole me or a backhanded compliment. He's a Christian comedian, so we can sort of discount me as having any value.
Right. Right.
I've had more interviews over my life over being clean. Wasn't it hard to be clean? Wasn't that like it was this terrible a handicap? And I go, of
Yeah.
course it's harder to be clean. That's why you got to be more clever and whatever.
Mm.
So it was very difficult for progressives to believe you could be funny and be a Christian and a comedian, because they just saw us as boring, or all we do is make fun of the poor downtrodden, all the identity politics that America has voted out in this latest election.
Yeah.
Um, and so they were going to call me a Christian comedian. That's how they wanted to label me. And it just bothered me. God, I don't want to be a Christian comedian, but I didn't get to make that choice. They're calling me that. And God said to me, why don't you go ahead and embrace it?
Mm.
Okay. You want to call me a Christian comedian? Okay. Yes. I'm a Christian comedian. Oh, and where do you get a load of this? So it was kind of like God was saying, you take the name and you redefine it. Because when I started out in the church, there were not that many Christian comics. There was only a couple, and they were mainly churchy, like Ken Davis and Mark Lowry and Shawnee
Yeah.
Pierce, all
Yeah.
friends,
Yeah.
all wonderful comics. But it was church, it was more
Yeah.
church
Yeah.
oriented. I came out of comedy clubs, so it wasn't like that. And God's like, I said, Lord, I'll go into the church if that's where you're calling me, but I don't want to dumb it down. And he's like, why do you think I trained you in nightclubs?
Hmm.
I need you to show my people that I speak in lots of voices and lots of flavors. And sometimes it's going to be dangerous. And so I believe I was given a prophetic voice to the church. I don't think I'm an evangelist. I think I'm more of a voice to the believers to go deeper. And so to me, what happened was I couldn't shut up. I could have made it
Yeah.
safer, and I could have made it more pleasant and more profitable. I lost my career. I mean, you don't come out and say you're a Christian comedian and a conservative comedian and think you're going to be on Netflix or on Jimmy Fallon. You're dead.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just said there's more about life that matters to me than just making a living as a comic.
Yeah.
And I have to say it.
Yeah.
And it took time for me to realize, if you feel compelled to say something that is godlike, it's because he called you to. You were anointed to do that thing. That's what a prophetic voice is. It doesn't mean I'm some great, amazing guy. The Bible says there's teachers and there's pastors and there's prophets, and it doesn't mean I'm not like Joseph or Isaiah or something. I'm a guy that just says hard things to the church to inspire them, hopefully to become more committed. That's
Yeah.
all. I didn't ask for that, but God calls all of us to do his story in our own unique way. Don't
That's good.
covet other people's gifts Whatever yours is, that's enough. Be that guy, be that girl. And that's what happened to me. I just felt like, okay, I get it, God. My gift isn't comedy. My gift is communication. And
That's good.
comedy is
Yep.
the flavor you want it to come in.
That's
That
good.
was your decision. That was your call on my life. And all I did was say, okay, I'll go.
That's good. I think of that verse where Paul says, "Woe is me if I preach not the gospel." Right? It's that deep spiritual yearning. Like I don't have a choice. I have to do
Yeah.
do this, or I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's all about your starting point, right? And that's where you started. Like, okay, well, we're called to proclaim Jesus. That's the starting point. And then you work from there. And I think a lot of people work backwards and they start with like, well, this is what I like or what I feel talented in or whatever. What can I do with that? Well, the what can you do with that or what should you do with that? That's already settled. The question is not what should you do. The question is how do you get there? That's so good. And I think so helpful to anyone because like you mentioned, right? Christian mechanic, Christian, this, that, or whatever. If you're a Christian, the goal is always the same. The question is, how is God going to use your unique gifts, talents, opportunities to accomplish that purpose?
Yeah.
And man, what a great word for all of us.
Yeah. I guess you you just need to the tricky part is I was a stand-up comic in nightclubs for years and then suddenly was moving over into ministry. So I kind of did it backwards. I didn't know how to do that. I was used to getting paid for doing this, like go do this thing and we'll
Yeah.
pay you and you make them laugh and then you get your check and you leave. And suddenly I'm in ministry and it's like, well, we don't have the money to pay you like this guy does, or
Yeah.
some churches do. And there's lots of churches that bring me in and I perform and they pay me my honorarium and whatever. And but then I make myself available to other churches who don't have it because I want to help them because I feel like that's what ministry is. If I'm ministering to people, that's like, okay, you get paid. And if you don't have the money, when you get it, let me know and I'll minister to you. But to be in ministry means you go because somebody says we need you here and you go, okay, God, you're going to have to figure this out. And you do whatever they need. And then God makes up for it through maybe a richer church or through a donor or whatever. But the key is this. And it's the tricky part, but it's what you have to do. What you have to analyze is your motivation. What am I doing this for? Well, I'm doing it for money, but I want to honor God by saying A, B, and C. And that is where you'll get off track. You have to realize what is my purpose? My purpose is to tell the story. So then you start and analyze, okay, is this decision over here going to let me tell the story? Because that's what I'm here for. Yeah, it does let me do that. Okay, then I'll go do that. That'll be the motivation. And the money or the funds or the means to help you, that will follow you. That will come behind you. But if you're motivated by that, you'll probably get off track because you won't be able to hear God working because you're motivated by mammon. I can't even speak the words. And so if you get used to that, am I doing the calling and assume God will provide then it keeps you kind of in the balance. And so now not everybody is, like I said, you're still in ministry if you're a mechanic, because if ministry means to tell the story, but obviously that's a different thing by somebody, fixing their engine, you're getting paid for that particular work. That's different than you're telling God's story in a church, right? That's a little bit of a different thing. So it's a nuance that you have to figure out. I wasn't used to it. I just want to get paid. It's easy. Just here is my thing. You laugh, give me my money. Good night. And that's not how it works in ministry.
You talk a lot about culture and particularly Christians in culture. A lot has changed, obviously, this week. I mean, I think we just took a political 180, right? So things have changed an awful lot in our country. You're all over. You talk to all kinds of people. You're in churches a lot. What is your word or your advice or your perspective, however you want to frame that, to Christian people at this moment in kind of our country's history?
Are you referencing this new administration?
New administration, a lot's changed. It feels like, I don't know if it's because of the new administration or because people are tired of a lot of what has happened in the last several years. There seems to be a shift that's taking place around us now. I would say it's toward conservative values, toward, all these things. We see all of this happening. I don't know if it's real or not. I don't know if it'll last or not. I don't know if it's because of the administration. No idea. But how do you frame what we're living through right now?
Okay, so progressivism, leftism, which is different than liberal, you need to learn that first. A classic liberal actually has a lot in common with conservatism.
Sure. Yeah.
Not all, but it has some pieces of it that you would actually agree with. One thing for sure of a classic liberal is they would allow you to disagree with them and have a conversation civilly. That is not what leftists do. They cannot allow you to disagree because they are Marxists. And Marxism means you must obey the state. So the first thing you have to understand is that the problem in the West, I say the West in general because you can see what happened to Europe, is leftism, not liberalism. The left is the problem. That's the cancer that has to be rooted out. That's the ones that created identity politics. That's the one that's created critical legal theory, which morphed into critical race theory, which has caused a DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion, which is a false flag to give the illusion of being kind when in fact it's a racist, bigoted point of view that demands that people get given certain status based on their victimhood, which is the antithesis of Christianity, which doesn't allow you to play a victim, nor does it allow you to covet other people's goods. So everything about the left is anti-Christ. It is demonic. It is, to make somebody a part of an identity instead of an identity in Christ is clearly demonic. So you need to understand that the reason that progressivism is so what appears to be fanatical and it appears to be almost a mental disorder, what people would call then in a funny way Trump derangement syndrome.
Right.
But it's true. It was true. It wasn't just I disagree with this guy. It was like they had lost their mind.
Right.
Like, why are you acting so crazy and making all this crazy stuff? None of it was, I mean, the man had been president for 4 years.
Right.
If he was going to take over the country, why didn't he do it when he was in charge?
Right.
So none of it makes sense unless you realize that to them, to leftists who have abandoned God, G.K. Chesterton said a very profound thing years ago. If you don't believe in God, you don't start believing in nothing. You believe in anything. And the moment that the left and the Democratic Party, which was controlled by the left recently, abandoned God, they literally took him off their platform. You don't stop believing in God and then that's that.
Yeah.
You are a human. You are designed to serve God and to worship God. So you'll fill that with an idol, a counterfeit. You'll find another God to worship. They chose politics, identity politics. We're going to save the world by giving all these poor marginalized people all their dignity back by giving them positions they don't deserve. But it makes us feel good about ourselves.
Yeah.
So you need to understand you are fighting a false religion. That'll help you see it with more objectivity. Realize that these people are lost and they are truly their minds have been clouded demonically. I mean, you believe in a spiritual realm, right? This is what's happening. These guys have literally lost their minds to a satanic diversion and the inability to think clearly. So, and then for the right leaners and Christians, Donald Trump is not your savior.
Correct.
He is a man. I'm grateful that he says things that I certainly hope he does because I believe that they are in line with Christian ideology, not my conservative ideology. You need to make sure that you do not worship the United States of America, because I don't. I worship Christ. but I'm grateful for it. Why wouldn't I be grateful for a nation that told me I have the freedom to worship Christ without being
That's right.
shot?
That's right.
Why wouldn't I be grateful and vote for that? You don't
Yep.
think Christians in Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Myanmar, India, North Korea, China, Haiti, Cuba, Indonesia. You don't think these people, Somalia, Nigeria, Uganda, Chad, South Africa, you don't think they wish they weren't being killed
Yeah.
and wish they
Yep.
could vote to
Yep.
be safe?
Yep.
And you've been given this option in the United States of America and you don't vote? Well, you're a buffoon. You're a fool.
Right.
So you don't worship the United States. You're grateful for it. You don't worship Donald Trump. You just pray first that he becomes saved, a true Christian, and that the name Jesus Christ utters from his lips as much as possible, that his cabinet are believers, that the next governors and senators and Congress and student council and, your local communities and mayors and governors are Christ followers. You believe that you pray for a third great awakening.
Yep.
And keep this most in mind. Now that Donald Trump, as of we record this, became president yesterday.
Yep.
Keep this most in mind. This is not a time for celebration. This is a reprieve. God has given us one small window of opportunity of repentance to be very grateful on your knees, and the church's moment to rise up in this nation from the pulpit and speak classic Christian theology from the pulpit about sexuality, about morality, about what is expected of believers and how to behave and becoming disciples, and to stand up for these things irrespective of what the culture says or tells you to do. If we don't do it now with this reprieve, I don't know how God can ever justify giving us any more chances. Because we were going to hell bad.
Right.
And he said, okay, I've seen enough of my people repenting and begging us for grace. Okay, now, what are you going to do this time?
That's good.
So this should be the most sobering moment in our history, to return to our original intent, to our original Savior, to the original founder of this nation, which was a belief from the Pilgrims, I'm talking, that this would be dedicated to Christ, this nation. Yeah. And if we do that, then we can not only watch God do amazing work and heal people throughout this land, but around the world. Around the world. So this is the time for the Christians to rise up, and no more being a Christian. That must be abandoned. It's time to be a disciple. Get in or get out. Quit wasting time. This is where we're at in America.
That's good. Brad, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you. Where can people who are listening that are not already following you follow you? You have a podcast.
Yeah.
Where do you want them to go to get everything you got?
Okay. Well, if you're interested in me as a comic and as a podcast, I have a podcast called Brad Stine Has Issues. You can subscribe and follow me on YouTube. I have a Brad Stine Has Issues. It's also on Life Audio, which is on the Salem network. It's audio only, Spotify and things like that. And if you're a church that believes that we would love to have a comedy night with a man who's unapologetic about his faith, but is trying to drive our people to discipleship, so it has a deeper, richer purpose than just laughs, go to bradstine.com. Contact me. Bring me in. I work for churches throughout this nation and other types of groups, pro-life events. I've worked with Christian schools, fundraisers, and things along that line. So that's what I do. That's my calling. It's my ministry, bradstine.com. Join the Mighty 10,000 on my Facebook page to help my ministry, or the Militia of the Mind, so you can be on my newsletter. And if you believe in what I'm about, my unique way of doing it, I could use your help.
That's awesome. Brad Stine, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure so much. Don't ask me again.
I
Is that
promise never to ask again.
you have had your grace period is over. I am going back to work.
I feel like you've said everything there is to say, so there's no reason to have you back.
I'll never do another podcast again. I'm just going to keep repeating this one.
It's good work. Brad Stine, thank you.
You got it.
So appreciate Brad, and just grateful that he would come on and spend a few minutes talking to us. Man, he has so much experience, so much depth, so much wisdom, and what a great word for us as Christians living in America. This is not a time to celebrate. This is a reprieve, an opportunity for us to get to work and really see God do something great. And we're excited about that, of course, but we need to be focused and understand what we're actually dealing with. So appreciate that as well. So much of the time, I have these conversations, we do these interviews, and we walk away going, what's there for me? Well, there was so much there for you, and I hope you got a hold of that. But one of the big takeaways for me listening to this conversation was simply understand that, number one, your goal is to live a life that glorifies God and points others to Him. That's the starting point. We talked about this. That's the starting point. But then beyond that, we understand we have unique gifts, callings, opportunities from God. And so the starting point doesn't change. The goal doesn't change, right? What we're trying to accomplish is the same for all of us. How we get there may be different from person to person because God has equipped us each differently. The way that we're made up and the opportunities, again, the relationships that we have, all of those things. And we need to use those to get us to that place where we're honoring and glorifying God. That was powerful. And then understanding, man, what a, I asked Brad, give me a picture of where we are right now as a country. And he did. He laid it out. Understanding this is a spiritual war that we're in. We're very grateful for the shift. Most of us who would listen to this podcast, grateful for the shift in administration. But it is a grace of God. It is a reprieve. It's an opportunity. We have 4 years of opportunity to really step up and use the spiritual freedom, religious freedom, the freedom of speech and opportunity that we have right now to call Christians to repentance where necessary, to discipleship always, and then to call non-believers, unbelievers to a place of understanding who they are, who God is, and how they can have a relationship with Him. And what a wonderful opportunity we have right now to do that. And a great conversation. I hope that you will share that out with others. Brad also mentioned his podcast is on Life Audio. You hear me all of the time talk about Life Audio. LifeAudio.com is where my podcast is hosted as well. The audio podcast, you can find it anywhere, of course, but hosted on lifeaudio.com. And they've got other great podcasts there like Brad's and many other great podcasts. So please go ahead and check that out. And as we leave today, I will encourage you, as I try just about every episode, I forget sometimes, but just about every episode, encourage you, remind you that when the bullets are flying your direction, when it seems like your world is falling apart, you only have two choices. You can stay where you are and die, or you can do the better thing and put one foot in front of the other and march. So the question in front of all of us all the time is this: what are you going to do? Thank you. I'll see you next time.